Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beloved Community's webinar to prepare your equity audit. This is for the Equity at Work cohort in Memphis for August 2019. My name's Lauren Young, and I'm Beloved Community's data strategist. Today, I'm going to walk you through an introduction to Beloved Community, an overview of our DEI standards and indicators, an overview of the equity audit, information to prepare your equity audit, a preview of your report, and then information on how you can contact us with questions. To introduce Beloved Community, though you may be familiar, our mission is to catalyze people and institutions to implement sustainable cross-sector diversity and equity practices that result in economic growth for the region. In our model, we build regional coalitions committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion across education, housing, and the workplace. In this cohort, we're focusing on the workplace. At Beloved Community, we believe that people change systems. We do this work with organizations so that when a funding stream changes, when a leader changes, that this work can continue on through the organization. In our theory of change, we believe that equity is economic development. We also engage in policy advocacy for diverse schools and diverse housing, and we believe in capacity building for workforces of the future. We build and lead regional coalitions and provide direct services to deepen capacity to serve diverse populations, develop diverse talent pipelines, and support diverse leadership. When all three of these are achieved, our theory of change states that regions will demonstrate economic growth and equitable access for all. At Beloved Community, we take a head and heart approach to this work. Oftentimes, organizations will take the heart-minded people in an organization and send them off to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. But what we know is that this work is actually much deeper, and it's ingrained in everything that we do as organizations. So our tools measure culture, governance, program, operations, and finance. And through the equity audit, you can examine practices within your organizations in all of these areas. Our mutual accountability framework starts with the outside yellow ring here that we see. We first observe and identify our behavior. We think about ourselves and individuals. How can we observe and identify shifts in our own behaviors? In the yellow ring inside, we look at internal equity audits for leadership, staff, board, and stakeholders. And then in the red ring on the inside is where we start to get to real performance metrics and absolute outcomes. How do we know what we're doing is moving the needle in the right direction? The DEI standards and indicators are what underpin all of the work that we do within the equity audit, which, as you know, is the organizational assessment through Beloved Community. Diversity is the first standard. The main question that we ask in diversity is, to what extent does our X population reflect our regional demographics? Within diversity, we have 4 substandards that take a deeper dive into that main question in the areas of awareness, application, selection, and participation. So awareness asks, how aware is a diverse population of our organization that we exist, that they can access our resources, that they can apply for employment, that they can be engaged as community members, and so on. The second is if you have an application process for employment, for any programs that you offer, for board service, anything like that, how diverse is the representation of your region that people are actually applying? And then once you get a diverse representation of individuals to apply for whatever the operational area may be, how diverse is your selection of individuals from that applicant pool? And then for participation, once you select a diverse group of individuals, how diverse is the participation? So how do people opt in once you've selected them? When it comes to equity, the main question that we ask is, to what extent are the outcomes from X program predictable by participants' demographics? There are 5 equity substandards that the equity audit examines. The first is internal equity audits. Do you have the systems in place to actually measure and assess whether or not your work is equitable? The second is assignment. So when people come into your organization, are they assigned in an equitable way to roles, to board service, like we mentioned, to specific programs? The third is advancement. So when people are in your organization, how do they move through your organization? So is it clear to everyone in an equitable way how individuals can be promoted within your organization, for example? Does everyone understand how that works in such a way that it leads to equitable advancement internally? In the fourth, financial. So do you have an equitable financial distribution of resources? And in the fifth, performance outcomes. Do you actually look at whether or not performance outcomes within your organization are predictable based on someone's demographics? For inclusion, our main question is, to what extent do our diverse populations feel comfortable, respected, and powerful within our organization? To what extent are diverse community perspectives included in decision-making that impacts their lives? Our inclusion substandards are language, shared voice, shared power, self-reports of belonging, and cultural relevance. In the first, language is pretty self-explanatory. It's the language that we use in speaking, in writing, anything we publish digitally, in print. Is that language inclusive of all individuals? The second, shared voice, shared power. So we state here that what we mean by this is that a seat at the table is not enough. Do we really create a space within our organization and for all of our stakeholder groups that promotes a shared power among individuals, and that the space is actually conducive to a diverse and inclusive group of individuals to really use their voice to advocate for themselves? And the third is self-reports of belonging. So how much do individuals feel that they belong within your organization? And again, these are across all stakeholder groups, which we'll get to in a minute. We'll see what stakeholder groups we examine. And 4, cultural relevance. Does the work that we do across all of those organizational functions that we talked about, do we provide culturally relevant activities, celebrations, communications for diverse individuals? So this graphic here just kind of brings all of these standards and substandards together. You can see that all 3 of these standards and their associated substandards are going to be examined across all of the stakeholder groups in your organization. So on the equity audit, we look at all the different functions of your organization. We go through governance and leadership, supplier diversity, resources and finance, pedagogies and curriculum, if that applies to you, and talent and adult culture. The stakeholder groups for nonprofit organizations that you have the opportunity to examine through the equity audit are target population, community partners, subcontractors and vendors, staff, management, board of directors, employee assistance grants, and foundation or corporate giving. Oftentimes we get asked about staff and management being separated. This is really important because, as you'll remember, on the equity substandards, we separate out here assignment and advancement as well as financial. So it's really important for us to distinguish between all staff and then management staff who have likely advanced or been assigned from the get-go to a higher level position within an organization. So we separate out staff and management for that purpose, additionally as to see how people support those that they are supervising. You do have the opportunity when you're taking the equity audit to skip an entire section if that does not apply to you. A lot of people in organizations do not provide formal employee assistance grants for tuition, for professional development, other purposes, but we give the opportunity for you to answer questions if that does apply to you, and we give an opportunity for you to skip the entire section. When you do your equity audit, you can say, yes, I want to continue to this section, and you can see what the indicators or the questions are. And if you decide that that does not really apply to you, you can go back and say, no, I actually want to skip this section. So we give you the chance to really evaluate whether or not these sections are appropriate for your organization. We do recommend, of course, if there is a section that is difficult to answer, but it does apply to your organization. For example, subcontractors and vendors is a pain point for a lot of organizations because examining financial equity, diversity, and inclusiveness of subcontractors and vendors is not the highest priority for a lot of organizations, especially nonprofit organizations. However, we do have subcontractors and vendors, so we really want you to consider the difference between this doesn't apply to my organization and this does apply, but it's not a priority and it's really hard for me to answer. So if that's the case and it does apply to you, we do want you, or we would encourage you to go ahead and answer that section as honestly as you can based on the data that you have. When you are in a section, you do also have the ability to skip specific questions. But again, remember that the quality of the reports, the quality of the data, the quality of the conversation that you will have in community in the Memphis cohort, as well as the conversations and support that Beloved Community can provide to you, is really only as excellent as the input on the front end. So if you skip a lot of questions, the data may not be as high quality as you would like. So you do have the ability to skip certain questions as well within a section. But we'd encourage you to answer as many as you can. The options for selecting an answer or a response when you are completing the equity audit are really focused on evaluating, the question itself and whether or not you have data about it. So the lowest point value on any one question is no, and we need a data tracking tool. No, and we have a clear data about it. Yes, but we need a data tracking tool. Yes, and we have clear data about it. So for every single question or indicator on the equity audit, you will respond by selecting one of these 4 options. The most common question that we get is, where does it fall if my response is, I'm not really sure, and we don't have data about it? In that case, I suggest thinking about what you and your team of individuals completing this equity audit really believes from anecdotal, from experiences within your organization. And if you're really leaning towards, yes, I think that's pretty true, but we really just don't have data, then select that answer. If you're leaning towards, I honestly really have absolutely no idea, and we need a data tracking tool, then I suggest selecting no, and we need a data tracking tool. The worst thing that will happen is that you'll have a score that's lower than you'd like in a certain section, possibly, if you answer a lot of questions that way. But the good news is that we can talk in community through ways to track data, start building systems, what data you might realize that you have in these areas that you don't realize that you have right now. And then when you take this assessment every year, you will see your score go up in those areas because you have started to implement those data practices. So to prepare for your equity audit, there's a few helpful tips and resources that we suggest. First, consider your applicable stakeholder function groups. Those groups that we stated, consider whether or not they apply to you so that you can start to review the section instructions and recommended supporting data. We provide this resource so that you can actually look ahead at each section, each stakeholder section's instructions, and what we talk about, the kind of data that you might want to have on hand to be able to answer the questions. To be clear, when you're completing the equity audit, there is absolutely no uploading of data. There's no inserting specific metrics. Everything is answered by these 4 options. It's helpful, though, to think ahead and have the data and think about, as a team, understanding where you have really strong data practices and where you need improved data practices so that you can answer the questions in the appropriate way. You'll also want to identify your audit participants. We suggest that when you complete this equity audit, it's most effective for an organization when you engage a group of leaders or stakeholders that includes someone who's going to have the information and the expertise in the areas that you're assessing. So someone with knowledge of your finance, someone with knowledge of your operations, someone with knowledge of your data, someone with knowledge of your board or your governance, someone with real specific program knowledge. So identify who you'll want in the room. If you're doing it with a team of really informed individuals in all of those areas that are going to be examined, it takes about 3 hours as a team to do this from start to finish. You do have 7 days once you open the equity audit to go back in and complete it. And if you need an extension on that time, let's say you go in, you want to look around, poke around, you put your information in, and then you're actually going to come back, let's say in 2 weeks with your team, you were able to schedule a meeting to do this together. You'll just contact me and I will be able to reopen your window for you. That's no problem at all. But you do not have to do it all in one sitting. We also recommend that before you start your equity audit, you define diversity within your community. What identities will you include? What's important for you to examine? So, we know that when we go and look at regional demographics, data that's publicly available is often limited to what's collected in the census. Consider what else is important to your organization and whether or not you have data around that. Consider your local knowledge so that you can answer that diversity question representative of regional demographics. A really great resource is the American Community Survey, which is run by the United States Census Bureau, and it is more frequent than the 10-year census. So we recommend using that if you need to learn more about the community that you're serving. And then we also recommend that you look ahead and think about how you're going to communicate results with stakeholders. It's really helpful to have an idea of this from the get-go so that you can start considering what input you'll want from your community and how you will give it back. So finally, when we are often asked about what do the reports look like, there's 2 different types of reports that you'll see in the equity audit. So as soon as you submit your equity audit, you click that submit button, you're going to see a standard report on your screen. This has immediate feedback on organizational performance, on diversity, equity, and inclusion standards. Our score bands for the equity audit are inquiring, emerging, developing, expanding, and refining. These are all based on percentages of the total possible points for any one standard, for any one standard, any one substandard, any one stakeholder section. So you will see feedback, you will see your percent score, and you'll see a score band for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those top 3 standards. Then you'll see a percent score for the substandards under each of those. And you'll see feedback for the standard itself. When we get to the detailed report, which we will produce for every organization for use in community, we will give you this summary page, which shows you your percent scores for every standard. So here we see diversity, inclusion, and equity, every substandard, and for the target for the stakeholder and function groups as well. On the equity audit detailed report, you will also see an explanation of the score bands. So this will help you communicate with your community and understand where you fall in the spectrum of how you could have performed on the equity audit. You'll see a respondent profile. And again, this is really important because we want, as we said, we want sustainable change for organizations. So we want to make sure that if someone looks back at this report in 5 years and 10 years, that they're able to see the information that was entered for the individuals and how they were looking at the organization at the time that this equity audit was submitted. Then you will see a section for equity audit results analysis by standard and substandard. Again, you'll see here the score bands that are possible. You will see a score and a score band label for diversity. You will see a score for all of the diversity substandards. You also now in this detailed report see customized feedback for your score range for the standard as well as the substandard. And you see these for diversity, inclusion, and for equity. The detailed report also contains this information for your stakeholder function groups, whichever ones that apply to you, that you chose in that when you were submitting the equity audit. So here you see again your score for each stakeholder group, as well as feedback that's customized for your score in that stakeholder group. We also provide a global results comparison in every equity audit detailed report so that you can have a better understanding of how this compares to other nonprofit organizations that have submitted an equity audit. This is really helpful to wrap your mind around how does this fit in with the larger nonprofit community? How are other organizations performing? So any questions when you submit your equity audit, you can submit directly to me, Lauren Young. I'm the data strategist with Beloved Community. My email address is lauren@wearebeloved.org. You can also send these questions to your facilitators as well, as I'm sure they've shared their contact information with you after session 1. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I look forward to supporting you all in the submission of your equity audit, as well as in the reporting and any data questions you might have. Thanks a lot and have a great day.